There is a societal perception that maturity comes with age, but true emotional development is a much more complex process. It is not uncommon for women to find themselves going around in circles, facing the same relationship problems, repeating past mistakes, or feeling empty despite appearances of well-being. What is the reason for this phenomenon? Is it all down to trivial irresponsibility, or are the roots of the problem much deeper? According to Carl Jung's theory, emotional immaturity is not always a conscious choice. It is often a consequence of unconscious patterns of behavior formed in childhood, reinforced by social norms and left unattended for many years. From an early age, women are expected to display emotional maturity, caring, self-sacrifice, and control over their feelings. But what happens when these expectations leave no room for genuine personal growth? When maturity becomes not the result of natural development, but rather an externally imposed template, it is often superficial. Deep down, unresolved childhood fears, insecurities, and addictions of all kinds can keep a person emotionally stagnant, regardless of the number on their passport. Can anyone break this vicious cycle? Jung's views shed light on the causes of such phenomena and, importantly, suggest ways to overcome them. True maturity implies the formation of a whole and independent personality, and the starting point on this path is the liberation from the shackles of unconscious patterns. Maturity is not an automatic process determined by age. A woman who crosses a certain age threshold does not necessarily gain emotional maturity or psychological stability. Many women reach adulthood but feel trapped, still struggling emotionally, repeating past mistakes, and relying on others for self-determination. What prevents psychological growth? One reason is childhood hyperparenting. Some women never learn independence because they were excessively shielded from the outside world during their childhood years. Parents, seeking to protect the child from difficulties, the need to make decisions and take responsibility, unwittingly hinder the development of his resistance to life's adversities. As a result, these women find it difficult to rely on their own strength and look to others, partners, friends, or authority figures, to guide their lives. Second, do not discount the impact of unhealed traumas and emotional wounds, which can significantly slow down the process of emotional maturation. Severe past experiences often become a major obstacle to full emotional maturity. A woman who has faced deep emotional turmoil, be it a dysfunctional family, betrayal of a loved one, or bereavement, may be subconsciously afraid to take responsibility for her life. She feels that the burden is overwhelming and tries to avoid it by remaining emotionally dependent on others or resorting to avoidance strategies. Third, we cannot ignore the influence of cultural stereotypes, which often encourage women to seek external approval rather than genuine self-knowledge. From childhood, many girls are taught that their worth is determined by how they appear to others, how attractive, pleasant to be around, and sympathetic they are. This focus on pleasing others can crowd out the natural process of self-reflection and self-knowledge, preventing them from connecting with their true selves. As the famous psychologist Carl Jung argued, a person remains immature as long as he or she avoids the challenges necessary for personal growth. True psychological development requires facing discomfort, taking responsibility for one's actions, and facing one's fears and weaknesses with courage. Avoiding these difficulties, the fair sex is able to maintain psychological youth, regardless of the numbers in the passport. Real maturity is not in following the generally accepted age limits, but in the deep inner work on themselves, aimed at becoming an integral and independent personality. For those who feel trapped, recognizing destructive patterns of behavior becomes the starting point for true personal growth. In mythology, there is the archetype of Puella Eterna, or the eternal boy, a man who stubbornly refuses to grow up. However, the eminent psychologist Carl Jung also identified a female counterpart to this phenomenon, Puella Eterna, or the eternal girl, a person desperately clinging to youth, avoiding responsibility, and resisting the psychological challenges of adulthood. This is a kind of Peter Pan syndrome in female form, reluctance to enter the age of full maturity. preference for being trapped in infantile thinking, idealization, escape from problems and dependence. One of the key characteristics of Puella Eterna is romantic idealism, expressed in the constant search for a savior. Such a woman often perceives the world through the prism of fairy tale dreams, where love has all healing power, and the prince on a white horse will certainly appear to relieve her of the burden of responsibility and life's difficulties. Instead of shaping her own life and striving for independence, she is waiting for some ideal partner who will magically give her existence meaning. In interpersonal relationships, this can manifest itself in a relentless pursuit of an idealized romantic picture, to the detriment of forming a genuine, deep, and real connection. There is a sense of inferiority or loss when a partner is not around. In this case, as a rule, in its field attracted people who tend to cultivate dependence rather than contribute to personal growth. The second characteristic trait is an escape from responsibility. Life appears to her as a succession of amusements and pleasures, where there is no place for seriousness. A distinctive feature of the eternal girl is the persistent resistance to any structure, discipline, and the need to make an effort. She may change jobs relentlessly, have difficulty making any commitments, or avoid anything that seems too routine and adult for her. Instead of taking control of her life and becoming its full master, she prefers to stay in a state of prolonged adolescence, constantly looking for thrills and avoiding serious solutions to pressing problems. This can manifest itself in an endless change of hobbies and interests, without, however, bringing any real progress. The very thought of long-term planning makes her depressed and sad. Delay or avoidance of difficult tasks and decisions becomes a characteristic feature of behavior. A third manifestation is a fear of aging, a desperate desire to hold on to youth as a way of reaffirming one's own importance. For the personality type designated as Puella Eterna, youth ceases to be just a period of life, becoming the basis of self-identity. Unable to develop a stable internal sense of self, this person relies on external attractiveness, attention, and charm to maintain a sense of self-worth. The aging process is perceived not as a natural stage, but as a catastrophic loss, which can lead to a manic desire to remain young at all costs. The self-esteem of such a person is entirely dependent on appearance and the approval of others, which prevents them from embracing the deeper aspects of maturity, such as self-knowledge, wisdom, and independence. How is this reflected in daily life? The Puella Eterna mindset has a significant impact on shaping interpersonal relationships, building a career, and overall self-perception. In romantic relationships, this woman often attracts partners who tend to be controlling or who encourage her fixation on appearance. In the professional sphere, she may have difficulty with long-term commitments, resulting in frequent job changes or avoidance of serious responsibility. Deep down, such a woman may feel a gaping void if her virtues are not echoed and validated in the eyes of others, creating an endless swirl of self-doubt. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, argued that true psychological maturity blossoms only through the process of individuation, when a person becomes a whole, self-sufficient individual, independent of external evaluations. However, the heroine, like a prisoner of the image of the eternal girl, Puella Eterna, resists this natural course of things, freezing in the psychological age of a child. Instead of bravely facing her shadow, that dark side of her personality where fears, complexes, and responsibilities lurk, from which she runs away, she prefers to take refuge in the ghostly world of eternal youth. But there is a high price to pay for this refusal to grow up. A woman who never dares to face her deep self is doomed to a sense of loss, anxiety, and dissatisfaction, and no amount of entertainment or youthful appearance can fill this inner void. The true path to freedom lies not in clinging to an elusive childhood, but in embracing adulthood in its entirety, with self-awareness, self-control, and responsibility for one's choices. But why is it so difficult for some women to enter the period of psychological maturity? The reason lies not only in personal weaknesses, but also in the fact that society, sometimes, actively encourages and supports infantile behavior, creating the illusion that eternal youth and carefree is the highest good. In society, there is often a paradoxical situation when the fair sex is tacitly approved for maintaining emotional and psychological infantilization. The charm of naivety, innocence, and playfulness is often more socially attractive than seriousness, independence, and self-confidence. This phenomenon is reinforced by the cultural image of the eternal girl, which is reflected in various spheres of life. Modern culture tends to romanticize the eternal girl, a woman whose life seems easy, carefree, and dependent on others. This image is actively exploited in romantic comedies, where the protagonist appears as a naive, clumsy, or eccentric person who expects love to bring meaning to her existence. Influencers are gaining popularity on social media, cultivating a childlike aesthetic, using soft voices, exaggerated innocence, and avoiding serious intellectual discussion. The beauty industry, in turn, persistently promotes the idea of youth as the ultimate form of power, forcing women to see aging as something frightening rather than a natural stage of life. Unlike men, who are encouraged from childhood to grow up and take responsibility, women are often confronted with the subliminal message that remaining youthful and carefree is preferable to the pursuit of wisdom and independence. Throughout history, perceptions of female adulthood have undergone significant changes. In the past, in many cultures, women were expected to assume adult roles early. They bore the burden of responsibility for household management, finances, and important decision-making, playing a key role in the lives of their families and communities. While such expectations were often restrictive, they at least recognized women as mature and competent individuals. In the modern world, women have gained unprecedented freedom. However, the pressure to remain infantile has paradoxically increased. Entry into adulthood is increasingly delayed, and with it the assumption of responsibilities. This leaves many women feeling confused and disoriented when they do have to face the realities of adulthood. Famous psychologist Carl Jung viewed immaturity not just as an individual problem, but as a reflection of cultural trends. In a society that cultivates the cult of youth and discourages deep self-reflection, the process of individualization of personality is hindered. People are deprived of the opportunity to unlock their potential and become mature, independent individuals capable of fully realizing their uniqueness. Ladies, mired in the mentality of the eternal teenage girl, often do not realize their situation because the world around them relentlessly encourages and reinforces their infantilism. True psychological maturation requires rejection of culturally imposed stereotypes, favoring depth over superficiality, introspection over seeking approval, and true maturity over illusory youth. In Jungian psychology, the concept of the shadow represents repressed aspects of the psyche, character traits that a person rejects because they do not conform to the desired image of the self or social expectations. Often the shadow holds the enormous potential of a woman, her willpower, determination, ambition, independence, and even anger. However, instead of embracing these qualities, many women suppress them, driven by fear of judgment, rejection, or being perceived as too much. As a result, they may resort to infantilism as a defense mechanism, taking refuge in a role that seems safer and more socially acceptable. So why do female members of the fair sex sometimes give up their inner power? From childhood, girls are taught that it is important to be nice, compliant, and sympathetic, rather than bravery, determination, and strength of character. Society often criticizes women who are overly independent or ambitious, labeling them as intimidating, difficult, or unfeminine. Over time, such pressure can lead to self-destructive behavior when a woman subconsciously belittles her own virtues in an effort to conform to conventional norms. Let's look at a few examples of shadow feminism in action. A woman may hide her brilliant mind or pretend to be naive so as not to scare off others. She avoids leadership positions, as responsibility seems to her something alien and uncomfortable. She prefers to stay in a relationship where she is dependent on her partner instead of gaining complete independence. She gives up on her own ambitions, convincing herself that success doesn't matter or that she is not yet ready to achieve what she wants. In each of these scenarios, immaturity acts as a shield, a way of avoiding judgment, responsibility, or the discomfort of discovering one's potential and gaining inner strength. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist, argued that true personal development is only possible through the integration of the so-called shadow, the recognition and acceptance of those aspects of one's own self that have been rejected and repressed. In the context of women's psychology, this involves realizing that qualities such as determination, perseverance, and autonomy are not negative traits or sources of danger at all. On the contrary, they play a key role in the formation of a holistic and well-rounded personality. Liberation from the shackles of psychological immaturity is not just a formal adulthood that conforms to generally accepted norms. Rather, it is a return to the origins of one's own power, which has been pushed into the realm of the shadow. It is the power to think critically and independently, to make courageous decisions, and to structure one's life according to one's own beliefs and desires. Getting rid of psychological infantilization is not a forced growing out of childhood, but a deep inner transformation that touches the very foundations of the personality. Jung emphasized that true maturity is achieved through the process of individuation, the integration of all aspects of the psyche in order to gain wholeness and independence. For women influenced by the Puella Eterna archetype, eternal youth, and stuck in an infantile mindset, this means confronting the unconscious patterns that keep them trapped in immaturity and reaching their full potential. True maturity originates in unwavering honesty with oneself. It's not uncommon for women to suppress certain facets of their personality, whether it's career aspirations, righteous anger, a desire for independence, or inner strength, simply because these qualities are at odds with established societal norms and expectations. However, instead of ruthlessly rejecting these character traits, it is necessary to boldly face them and try to comprehend their true nature. There are often underlying fears lurking in the background, fear of rejection, failure, or the burden of responsibility, that stealthily shape our unconscious behavior. Desires that dare to challenge accepted social conventions can be deliberately ignored, and self-sabotage can subtly prevent an individual from reaching his or her full potential. True personal growth only begins when these carefully hidden aspects are recognized and integrated into the personality structure rather than unaccountably dreaded. Another crucial shift in consciousness occurs when one is freed from the compulsive need for external validation. From an early age, many women are conditioned to seek the approval of others to earn love, admiration, or lust. This addiction condemns them to dependence on other people's opinions, distracting them from focusing on their own inner development. Psychological maturity involves a decisive shift away from trying to please others and toward making decisions based on deeply held personal values. When inner depth is prioritized over external attractiveness, when self-esteem is no longer dependent on fleeting attributes such as beauty or social status, a woman gains the ability to shape her destiny according to her own beliefs and values. A key element of this transformation becomes a harmonious blend of feminine and masculine energies. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, argued that in each person slumbering both of these forces, the feminine, representing intuition, emotional sensitivity, and the desire for interconnection, and the masculine, symbolizing willpower, independence, and rational thinking. Often women, succumbing to the influence of stereotypes, reject their inner masculinity, preferring a passive role to active leadership, avoiding logical analysis of situations, and displaying self-confidence. However, a woman who achieves a balance between these two aspects of her personality is freed from the constraining framework of prejudice and embarks on the path to a fuller and stronger life. Perhaps one of the most significant steps on the path to psychological maturity is accepting unconditional responsibility for one's life. Many women, without realizing it, live in anticipation of a miraculous rescue, hoping for an ideal partner, a wise mentor, or a happy accident that will magically change their lives for the better. Personal transformation begins with taking responsibility for one's life and choices, abandoning the habit of blaming external circumstances for failures. An important stage is the development of psychological resilience, the ability to meet difficulties face to face rather than avoid them. There comes a moment when a woman realizes that help from outside will not come, and then she stops waiting passively, turning into an active creator of her destiny, into a heroine of her own life drama. The essence of individuation is the formation of an integral, self-aware personality, free from subconscious stereotypes and patterns of behavior that hinder development and doom to stagnation. Rejection of the infantile position of the eternal girl, a bold look in the face of one's fears, building a life based on deep self-knowledge and a clearly defined goal. This is the true path to psychological maturity. It is not about blindly following the generally accepted norms and standards of adult life, but about revealing one's full potential, accepting all facets of one's personality, and living a life filled with independence, depth, and meaning. Maturity is not just an inevitable consequence of the years lived. It is a conscious choice, a continuous process of self-analysis and personal growth. Many women remain psychologically immature, not because they lack the ability to develop, but because they have learned from childhood a strategy of avoiding the very problems and challenges that lead to true independence and self-realization. Modern society often favors youth without encouraging deep introspection, and often creates conditions for the persistence of infantilism rather than pushing for the acceptance of maturity. True personal empowerment, however, does not come through staying in the comfort zone of immaturity, but through the process of individuation, the path to becoming a whole and self-sufficient individual. This process requires the courage to come face to face with one's shadow, to overcome the need for external approval, and to take full responsibility for one's destiny. In this regard, the key question is not why some women choose to remain in a state of psychological immaturity, but who is ready to take a decisive step towards full psychological maturity and autonomy.